Hello, BookTube. Friday reads for you today. This is the last day of the month, and so I have a couple books over here that I'll be showing what I'll be reading for next month. First of all, we have The Shadow King by Maza McGinty. I could not finish this one. The the author uses doesn't use quotes when somebody is talking, kind of like Cormac McCarthy, and it got hard to follow the conversation when there's so many people talking. Also, she has to describe everything. Like if it's in a linen closet, she has to describe how many towels are there, bath towels, washcloths, and everything that's in that closet has to have a description in it. This book was over 400 pages. It was 400. Yeah, it was just right at 400 pages. But the book itself, I finished on page 110 when I gave up on it. And the book reads like YA novel. One of those fantasy YA novels by Sarah J. Maas or something like that. And the writing itself is overwrought in a way that is suffocating, highly poetic wording supplied to everything, creating an atmosphere that is overly intended to be rich. Here's a quote from the book. She is clothed, but she is naked. She is a spectacle, but she is invisible. She is a girl who has never been split, and what stands here is both flesh and shadow, bone and silhouette, no more than air filled with smoke. And that's all through this book. It is no, I couldn't I had to pass on it. The next book I'm reading is amazing. This is Francois Rene de Chateaubriand, Memoirs from Beyond the Grave, 1768 to 1800. It has 12 books, and currently I'm on book 7. Each book deals with a certain point of his life. Like book 1 will go through his ancestry. Book 2 talks about his childhood. Book 3 goes into when he was in boarding school. And see if I can find a couple here. The book 3 has talks about, with one section here, talks about his sister Lucille and how Lucille turned him on poetry. And there's a little part I'll read right here. It's called Dawn. What sweet radiance comes to illuminate the east? It is young Aurora, who half opens her lovely eyes, still heavy with languorous sleep. Nimble goddess, go, leave your nuptial bed, and assume your purple robe. Let a soft sash enwrap you in its bow. Let no sandals confine your delicate feet, no ornaments profane your lovely hands, which open the doors toward day. But you have already risen on the shadow of a hill. Your golden hair falls in the most moist tress upon your rosy neck. From your mouth you breathe a pure and perfumed air. Tender goddess, all nature smiles at your presence. You alone shed tears and give birth to flowers. And there's one in here in which his schoolmate, excuse me, one of his schoolmates at a boarding school in Chambord, excuse me, is by the name of, goes by the name of, let's see if I can find it, Lee Milan. And Lee Milan became a French military officer and conspired to assassinate Napoleon in 1799. The assassination attempt, which involved an explosive device consisting of a barrel loaded with gunpowder, was referred to as La Machine Infernale. So, assassination attempt on Napoleon, which no one's ever written about. And Francois René de Chateaubriand goes hunting with the King of France. And see if I can find that here. Excuse me. And go hunting with the King of France, Louis XVI. And he talks about the French Revolution, Robespierre, in book 5. And this is what he said about Louis XVI. Louis XVI was not a liar. He was weak. But weakness is not falsity, even when it takes place and serves its functions. The respect that this martyr king's virtues and misfortunes should inspire in us renders all human judgment almost sacrilege. So he talks about the different systems being set up in place and different things going on. And then he makes plans to journey to America. First, he goes to England, where he's treated with royalty, and he doesn't like it at all. He doesn't like to be treated like royalty. And then he goes on to America, and one of the things here, the anger was raised and we headed for the roads in the port of Baltimore. As we approached, the waters narrowed, they became smooth and still. As we were sailing up the sluggish stream bordered by the avenues of trees, Baltimore came into view, as though far end of the lake. Across from the city stood a wooden hill, the foot of which we were beginning to build. We moored beside a quay, a harbor. I slept on board and set one foot on land until the next morning. Then I found a room at the inn with my baggage in tow, while the seminarians withdrew to the establishment that had been prepared for them, which they would go the separate ways to America. And he talks about his visits to America and his visit to Philadelphia. And on his visit to Philadelphia, in one page, he talks about more about Philadelphia than that quack biographer Benjamin Franklin does in the entire biography. He meets George Washington, and then it has a parallel between Washington and Bonaparte. One page here is very good. It says Washington does not belong, like Bonaparte, to that race which surpasses ordinary human stature. There's nothing astonishing about him. He does not pose in a vast theater. He does not take on the most competent generals and the most powerful monarchs of the age. He does not rush from Memphis to Vienna, from Cadiz to Moscow. He defends himself with a handful of citizens on unheralded ground within the narrow circle of the domestic earth. He fights no battles that recall the triumphs of Arbela and Paracelsus. He overturns no thrones, only to rebuild others from the ruins. He never says to the kings at his door, "He has been waiting too long. Now Attila is bored." So that was Memoirs Beyond the Grave, 1680, 1768 to 1800, from Francois René de Chateaubriand. I also finished Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington. Excuse me. As part of the Half Price Bookstore calendar, which tells a decade of when the books first were published. So, Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington was published in the decade of the 1900s. Also, that came out that year was Up from Heart of Darkness, Hound of the Baskervilles, Call of the Wild, Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, House of Mirth by Edith Wharton, and The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. The music from that decade, the 1900s, was Scott Joplin, his complete works, Salome by Richard Strauss, Burt Williams, the early years, 1901 to 1909, The Merry Widow by Franz Lehr, Complete Victor recordings by Enrico Caruso, Tosca by Giacomo Puccini, and Symphony No. 8 by Gustav Mahler. In the decade of the 1900s, the movies that came out were A Trip to the Moon, The Great Train Robbery, A Corner in Wheat, Impossible Voyage, Rescued by Rover, The Story of the Kelly Gang, Life of an American Fireman, and L'Enfant Prodigy. Now I'm on to the decade of the 1910s in February. For book that decade was The Dubliners by James Joyce, The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, My Antonia by Willa Cather, Tarzan the Eighth by Edgar Rice Burroughs, Edith Frome by Edith Wharton, Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson, Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. Those interested in music of that decade, the 1910s, was the complete recordings of Jane Reese Europe, Memphis Blues Band by W.C. Handy, The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky, Over There, American Songs and Marches of the Great War by various artists, The Planets by Gustav Holst, Origins of Red Hot Mama by Sophie Tucker, The Essential Collection, the original Dixieland Jazz Band. And the movies from that decade, the 1910s, are Intolerance, Love's Struggle Through the Ages, Soldier Arms, J'ai l'Accuse, Tilly's Punctured Romance, Broken Blossoms, Frankenstein, and The Doll. So, next month, I will be reading from a book from this decade, the 1910s, Edith Frome by Edith Wharton. Using this book, this is a half price at a thrift store, This came out in 1956. This actually came out Eastside Junior High Library. It was discontinued. It originally came out in 1911. So 1910, 1911, that'd be good. So this is Edith Frome by Edith Wharton. Very short novels, but only about 175 pages. So that would be my on to the 1910s. Next, I'll be reading a read-along by someone named Steve, who lives up in Massachusetts. And he's going to be the moderator of a read-along of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And I read a little bit of this and just put it aside. But I plan to go through this for now. It's a horrible cover on this Signet Classic mass market paperback. So yeah, there you go. So far, I'm gonna be reading Edith Fromm by Edith Wharton, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, and of course, Memoirs from Beyond the Grave, 1768 to 1800 by Francois René de Chateaubriand. And the translator is of this work is Alex Andresi, who is a writer and translator and lives in the Netherlands. So, and there you go. That's it for Friday Reads, and take care.